you so much for coming out. It really means a lot to me to be here at this bookstore. It's on many days my home away from home, and it's the best independent bookstore in the world, bar none. And I thank Barbara and Mark and Ellie and Susan and Marshall and the whole staff, because I spend a lot of my time here browsing and making up excuses to get away from my writing chores. Somebody recently asked me, they said, "Wil, has anything changed in your life with all the hubbub about the movie and all these stars in your orbit, these Hollywood stars in your orbit?" And I said, no, really, nothing has changed. Although I am curious of why I have recently heard from both of the ladies who turned me down for the high school prom. One lady named SHEILA said, "I've always wanted to come to Washington, Wil." And she said, "Surely you aren't holding a grudge." I said, "Now why would I hold a grudge for what happened on May 13th, 1972 at 2:30 in the afternoon on an overcast day outside of Miss Dixon's homeroom class, when I asked you if you would go to the prom with me? Now, why would I hold a grudge all these years later?" So I went in search of a man who I did not know existed. It was a newspaper reporter's calling. It's what we do. It's called old-fashioned shoe leather. You make a lot of phone calls. You come up with an idea. You make a lot of phone calls, and you hope you can find somebody on the other end of your goal to tell the story. I called a gentleman by the name of Eugene Allen because somebody down in Florida knew what kind of story I was after and told me, if you can find him, then that might be a pretty interesting story. She told me she thought he worked for 3 presidents. When I called him, finally, after an arduous search and a whole lot of phone calls, 57, yes, great research, Barbara, by the way, I told him that I was a reporter for the Washington Post and I wanted to come over and write about his life. And he turned to his wife. He said, "Honey, there's a reporter here, and he wants to come over and talk to me." And she said, "Talk to you about what?" And he said, "Well, I guess my life, and what I've done when I was working at the White House." And she said, "Well, tell him he can't come tomorrow because you and I both have doctor's appointments." So I waited a day, lost sleep, wondering if they were going to change their mind. And it was a bitterly cold day when I walked over there, and they were in a very lovely, humble house. And the first thing she said to me, Helene Allen, Mrs. Allen, she said, "Where are you from?" I told her I was from Columbus, Ohio. And she said, "Who are your people?" And I said, "Well, my father, Mr. Haygood, Mrs. Haygood, my mother." She turned to her husband and she said, "Gene's met a lot of people coming through the White House. Gene, do you know any Haygoods?" And I said, love my parents as much as I do. They weren't walking in tall cotton in and out of the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. A story unfold that was astonishing. It wasn't 3 presidents. He corrected me. He said it was 8, from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan. There was only one picture in the living room of the Reagans in Mr. and Mrs. Allen. In Washington, D.C., if somebody comes in 3rd place in something, they're going to frame it and put it on their wall. And they didn't have a lot of things in their living room, and I kind of wondered about that. After several hours, she looked at him and she said, "You can show him." Just like that. She said, "You can show him." And he got up and led me to the basement door. It was locked, and he told me to hold his arm tight. He said, "It's dark until we get to the center of the basement where I turn on the lights." I had no idea what I was going to find down this basement. We walked down, he turned on the lights, and I started looking around, and I got dizzy. Literally, I got dizzy. There were these astonishing photographs of Mr. Allen and Harry Truman, Mr. Allen and Dwight Eisenhower, Mr. Allen and Jackie Onassis, Mr. Allen and Ella Fitzgerald when she visited the White House, Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Michael Jackson, Mr. Allen and Ronald Reagan, Mr. Allen and LBJ, and I was like spinning. It was like a museum. It was like the Smithsonian, but it was all his life. This black man's life was gathered across 34 years of White House history. And I looked at letters that had been written to him. I looked at a Stetson hat from Lyndon Johnson. I looked at a tie that Mrs. Kennedy gave him at midnight on the day after her husband had been assassinated. Mr. Allen got up in the middle of the night because he wanted to get back to the White House. In the hallway, he fell down sobbing. It was the first time his son had said that he saw his dad cry. I was speechless, and I walked over to him in the basement, and I said, "Now, Mr. Allen, are you sure that nobody has ever written about you? A long story?" And he took a step closer to me, and he said, "If you think I'm worthy, you'll be the first." His wife yelled down and said, "Show him the picture of me and Sarah Vaughan. Make sure to show him that picture." He said, "Honey, I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it." That was a Friday. On Sunday, their son, Charles, visited. Mrs. Allen met her son at the door and said, "Honey, Charles, I'm so happy. I'm just so happy." He said, "Mama, why? What's going on?" She said, "A writer from the Washington Post came by. Somebody's finally going to do Eugene's story. My husband's story, Charles, your dad's story is finally going to be told. I'm so happy. Lord knows I'm so at peace. I'm going upstairs, Charles, and I'm going to bed. I'm so happy." She went upstairs, she went to bed, and she died. When I called him the next morning just to say hello and see how the photo session had went, he said to me, "She's gone." I said, "Who's gone?" He said, "My wife, Helene, she's gone." I said, "Is she gone to the store? She's gone where?" He said, "She died." A day before the election, he went to the polls alone. I didn't think I could write the story. I told my editor, I said, "Maybe I stressed her out. Maybe I caused this. I'm hurt myself. I thought there was no story. My editor called me that night and said, the best thing you can do, Wil, for the Allens, write their life story. Do what you do. I wrote the story. Mr. Allen went to the polls, and America elected its first African-American president. On succeeding days and weeks, letters poured in to me for Mr. Allen in his name. I've kept all of those letters, and I'm going to read a few. Dear Mr. Haygood, I was moved by your article about Eugene Allen, but I burst into tears when I read of the passing of his wife. I finally retire from military service next spring and will get to finally go home to my wife and family. Now more than ever, I realize how precious the time is that we have left together. Thank you from my heart. Al, Flint, Michigan. Hello, Mr. Haygood. I'm one of the few San Francisco area voters who voted for McCain. Your story was poignant in its simplicity and reminds me that while my guy might have lost, we all might have won. Thank you. Jim Nealon, Fargo, North Dakota. Dear Mr. Haygood, thank you for the fine story about Mr. Allen and his amazing career. The last paragraphs caught me by surprise and literally took my breath away. I am a 58-year-old white man, raised in Southeast Washington, D.C., and a lifelong resident of this region. Like everybody else, I have viewed race relations through the colored lenses of my personal experiences. Some of those experiences have been positive, some have been negative. I have been neither a die-hard Democrat nor a die-hard Republican. I admit to voting for people on both sides of the aisle. This year, my inclination was to vote for John McCain, primarily because of Senator Obama's social policies. I mentally debated their positions and thought that I had reached a rational position. My vote was going to be cast for McCain. On my drive to the polling place, I started thinking about America's history in the moment that was quite possibly at hand for the American people. Not just Black Americans, but all Americans. I walked in and voted for Obama. I think that on an intellectual level that I can understand the excitement over the significance of the Obama election. I know that I can never understand it on an emotional level. Your story about the Allens took me to a new level. I will admit that I was expecting another story about a family waiting a long time to see a Black president and never thinking that it was going to happen. Those stories are in every paper and on every radio and television. I cried when I realized that Helene had died before the election. Please extend my sincere condolences to Mr. Allen and his family. Martin Kane. Dear Mr. Haygood, my name is Peter Flynn, and I live here in Dublin, Ireland. Every Saturday morning, myself and my 7-year-old son go to Nolan's for our breakfast, while my wife and my 13-year-old son go to rugby. I buy the Irish Times to read. Max gets the comics. We chat along the road as we walk. But during our breakfast, I scan the paper and he giggles with his head in his comics. I have to remind him to eat rather than read. This morning, I stopped scanning at page 11 of the Irish Times and read your article on Eugene Allen. It was pretty spectacular. I found your observations excellent and succinct. Your portrait of this man and his late wife and the fact that Eugene Allen's life had in some way mapped history and the incredible decision of the American people in the last few days was very touching and very provocative. To finish, I have never in my life written to a newspaper columnist. This is the first time I hope to be inspired to write to others in the future. Regards, Peter Flynn. So, it was a life lived beneath the American flag. A man who would leave 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the 1950s and much of the 1960s and go to Virginia or Maryland and have to walk into a segregated department store where he couldn't try on a hat. He lived in the time of Emmett Till, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Sputnik, the Cold War, the Korean War, Medgar Evers. He lived history writ large. It was a pure American life. Hollywood came calling, and we made a movie. Forest Whitaker stars as the character inspired by Mr. Allen. His wife is played by Oprah Winfrey. Other people in the movie are Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave and Cuba Gooding and Terrence Howard and Lenny Kravitz and Clarence Williams III from the Mod Squad. I watched the Mod Squad as a kid, so I had to rush up to him on the movie set and tell him how excited it was to meet him. He looked at me and he said, "Cool." I want to introduce a few people who are very important to the fact that a movie has been made. Every studio in this nation turned the producers down. So Laura Ziskin, bless her heart, said she was going to go out and she was going to find African-American investors to make a movie of this heartwarming couple. Laura Ziskin knew, as we all did, that Eugene Allen didn't wield a lot of power, but he never missed a day of work. And every president that he worked for fell in love with him. In the end, he was a stitch in the American flag. Without SHEILA Johnson, who, as you know, is the co-founder of BET, without her, there would be no Butler movie. When the coffers were empty, she stepped forward and said, "Here's some seed money. Go out, find a writer, find a director." She scanned this country and she found investors and she touched their conscience and she touched their heart. Without SHEILA Johnson, no Butler movie, and I would like to bring her up to the podium.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. This is Wil's first event to really talk about the birth of the Butler. I'll give you a little backstory. As you know, I'm a businesswoman, and when Laura Ziskin came to me, and I remember sitting in the Verizon Center, I had a game. I was struck about how ill Laura Ziskin was. She was dying of cancer, and I had met Laura 3 years before. And when she came into the office, she had a script with her, and she said, "SHEILA, I'm not going to live much longer, but I want this to be your movie." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by my movie?" She says, "I want you to read the script and then call me." So I sat up and I read the script. I called her. I said, "This is the most incredible script I've ever read." I said, "I am committed to doing this. So to make a long story short, I then went to New York and met with Lee Daniels. And he and I talked for 4 hours. I gave him my feelings about the script. We talked about who should be cast. We talked about Wil and such a phenomenal writer that he is, that he was able to put this together. I had flown out to LA. I had met with the head of Sony Pictures. Sony really did not want to do the movie, and I knew then it was going to be an independent film. So it was on my shoulders to get out there and raise every penny for this movie. And I was determined to get it done because I really believe in the story. It's a story about an unsung hero that needs to get out there. I commend Politics and Prose for having Wil Haygood here. I commend all of you for being here tonight. On August 16th, this movie will be released throughout the theaters. We did it, Wil. So I couldn't be more honored to be the executive producer on this movie. I am so excited. Wil and I will go to the premiere in New York this Monday. So we're very excited. And again, thank you all for being here. And please tell everyone about this movie. We want this to be a blockbuster. This is a new day in Black film. Thank you.
Without her, no Butler movie. When the screenwriter, Danny Strome, and I, and Charles, wanted to get into the White House, into the kitchen to do some research, we needed some contact, a contact. And we found one, a very wonderful, special human being who worked as chief usher at the White House, Admiral Stephen ROCHON. He paved the way for us to get into the White House. And not only that, he came down to the movie set and served as the White House consultant on this movie. Every day when we looked around and we saw him on the movie set, we all felt a little more secure. We felt that this painting in the Kennedy Oval Office that's supposed to be over there cannot be 2 feet to the left, or he would stop production and say, "Whoa, you can't do that." He was exact, he was formidable, and he is one of the most kind-hearted human beings I've ever had the pleasure to meet, Admiral Stephen ROCHON.
Well, thank you very much, Wil. I didn't win all the battles on the set, believe it or not. I can recall Lee Daniels saying often, "Admiral, you're killing me." But thank you, Politics and Prose, for hosting this great event. I hope this is not my last time here. Hint, hint. And Ms. Johnson, it's a pleasure seeing you again. We broke bread together at the White House at lunch. And of course, amongst us is Eugene Allen's son, Charles Allen. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. They want you to stand. Well, I think the most thing we appreciate, for those of us that had the privilege of already seeing a private screening, is that Charles did go to Vietnam, as Wil mentioned, but he came back. Unlike the actor in the movie who did not. So, but anyway, real quick, Wil gave me a couple of minutes just today, asked if I would say a couple of words. We had a wonderful time last night on Marcia Jew's radio talk show. We talked about a good hour. It was a blast, and it brought back many great memories. But I had the privilege of running the White House staff, the executive resident staff, which included the Butlers, both for President Bush, who hired me, and President Obama, who asked me to stay. I didn't quite reach Eugene's heights of 8 presidents, but I did in uniform 9 presidents total. But at any rate, I had the privilege of running that staff, well, they ran me. But I really gained a tremendous amount of respect for the Butler staff. The movie is phenomenal, but the writer is twice as phenomenal. To start off that story, because I had the pleasure in 2008 of meeting Eugene Allen. He came to the White House to give his oral history with 3 of the other surviving maitre d's of the White House. The movie doesn't mention that he did achieve the highest level in that staff as a maitre d', running the rest of the Butler staff. And I won't go too deep into this because he did give me 2 minutes. But they didn't just serve people or just serve the President of the United States or serve the First Family. They were there to make America look great in front of kings and queens and other dignitaries. And so the movie, first Wil's book and the article captures that, and the movie captures that pretty well too. But I was fortunate, like I said, to meet him and take him to lunch. And I'll never forget when we went to the White House mess. It doesn't sound very glorifying, but it is a naval term. We eat in the mess. But this is pretty ritzy. And it's only for senior staff. And I was the first African American to become chief usher of the White House. So I had the privilege of going to the White House mess. And invited Eugene, and I says, Mr. Allen, and I say Eugene now, but out of deep respect, Mr. Allen, have you ever been here before? And he says, no, I couldn't even come close. So that's what it was when he was serving at the White House. So when Wil's fine article came out in the Washington Post, I was elated. It was just a few months later. And I says, this man has captured the essence of what these fine gentlemen do for us in America to make us look good in the United States. And then later, I met Wil for the first time 2 years later at Mr. Allen's funeral. And I had the privilege to give the message from President Obama and gave a copy of that letter to Wil. And when I went on set, I didn't really know who was responsible for me getting down there. I had a few people claim that they dropped my name, but it was Wil who passed my name on, and they forced me to go to my hometown in New Orleans for 40 days to be on the set. That was very, very tough. But Wil, I just want to just give you something here. Mr. Allen has one, and now Charles has it on the wall. But this is an original inaugural invitation for President Obama's first inauguration. And I want you to have this, sir. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Wait till I tell those ladies who turned me down for the prom about this. Whoa. There's a war raging in Vietnam. And there's a soldier with a rifle. He's hearing bombs overhead. And he's over there fighting for us. He's defending our country. His father is serving Pepto-Bismol to the president who sent this child to Vietnam. Eugene Allen had to walk up the stairs of the White House and serve President Lyndon Johnson, who sent Helene upstairs to many sleepless nights, worrying about their only child. We are blessed that he came home safe. Charles Allen has steadfastly honored his father's legacy. He has kept up his father's room. He understands emotionally and spiritually everything that his parents represented. Of course, he and I were at the hospital when his father was dying. He has meant so much to both author and book and movie project. He was a consultant throughout. A lot of his inspiration is up on the screen. I think that all of us on this film pretty much know how invaluable he was. I did not know when I first met him either that he was a cinephile. He is as wild about movies as I am, and so we've had many a late night about movies, and we would both sort of talk about, who should play this president or who should play that president. And I have to admit, many of his choices were spot on. His mother and father, who are gone, would be so very, very proud. Ladies and gentlemen, Helene Allen and Charles Allen's only son, the heir to their legacy, Charles Allen.
Ladies and gentlemen, needless to say, this is more than a little overwhelming. I've been up here before. Usually, most of the people are like in the first 2 or 3 rows. So, I mean, this, comparatively speaking, this looks like the Super Bowl. I mean, it's. I heard Pam Williams, one of the producers on this project, said that after this, our lives will never be the same again, and they won't. And they haven't been the same from that day that Wil Haygood turned the corner on my parents' street, and this whole thing started. There had been many people that came across the threshold of that house, and my parents stonewalled them and would talk to them. They said they didn't trust them. I don't want them in my house. And Wil was able to capture their trust, and especially that of my mother, because my mother, in some similarities to what I think the Oprah Winfrey character is, like, she kind of like, she had the sway. They're a traditional couple from that time. Dad was the man, but she had the sway. Before a senior moment overtakes me, I wanted to, and it's going to, I wanted to allude, I wanted to go back to what Wil was saying about that whole Vietnam episode. When I was in Vietnam, and my father was, how can I say it? He was on the job. He said, well, your dad works for the White House. You can get anything. It's like, no, it's not like that. He didn't play that game. But anyway, I'm in Vietnam, I'm in the infantry, and I'm walking every day, and I'm carrying that rifle, and I'm getting shot at. And I was not, at least I don't think I was a physical coward, but I was hungry. I was tired of being wet all the time. I mean, as you can see, I'm not a small person. I think I got down to like 120 pounds. And so I wrote my father, and I said, look, Dad, I said, you got to help me. But I said, go talk to the man. Go. I said, go talk to the man and see what you can do to get, and I said, look, let's do this. Put me in an aviation unit. I'll be a door gunner, At least I can sleep in a tent at night. I said, man, this is hell. And he wrote me a letter back, and he said, son, if the Kennedys were still in, he said, I knew them a lot better than I know these people. He said, you're going to be out there. And so, and that's the exact translation of what he said. He was he was a firm believer in, like if you eat the man's salt, you pay the man. And he was a very patriotic individual. As with my mother, he was a very conservative man. And they've done, when I'm watching the trailers and watching that contention between Oyelowo and Forrest, I mean, Dad and I, we had our moments that way, certainly, many times. He was politically on one end of the spectrum, and I was on the other. And my mother was with me. We worked on him. We operated on him. And toward the end, he started coming around. And we could get him to believe everything. The only thing we could never sway him to the fact that maybe Marion Barry wasn't that bad a guy. We couldn't, try as we might, we couldn't get him on that train. But, I mean, it's very interesting how many things are interwoven in this story. The Black Panther thing, my late first wife was in the Black Panthers, as was her sister. She was in there till she got snatched off the street by the FBI, and then some people went and talked to my father, then she wasn't in there anymore. Her father was an officer in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, so there's a lot of our history is intertwined in this whole project. But I can't say enough. I mean, in closing, I don't want to stay up here too long, but I want to thank Wil Haygood for turning that corner and turning this story into something what we call magic in a bottle. It was magic in a bottle because regardless of what would happen, this story, as Miss Johnson stated, no matter what happened, the story went on. It must have been DOA 3 times. And it kept going on and kept going and kept getting life. And so here we are at the end. So I haven't seen the movie either. So I'm going to be hopefully just as entertained as everybody else. And I'm predicting it's going to be very light. And I want it to be an inspiration to future generations. My dad, humble guy that he was, he said in the last year when this was all kind of like coming to a head, and he said, why are they so interested in me? He said, I don't understand. And then, you heard comments when they first said something about making a movie, and there was some nasty comments on the blog. People said, well, I'm really tired of these movies about maids and butlers, and why are they still doing this? And it's like, if you really want to know the answer to the question, you have to go all around the world, just like Wil said, because I got some of those letters too. And you go all around the world and you ask those people in New Delhi, India, and Korea, and all the other people that wrote in and were interested in this man. He touched the nerve, and he touched the nerve in people that would not go away. So hopefully we're going to get some satisfaction. Yes, I'd like to think so, Dad. He was humble to a fault. This is something that my mother would have really wanted. I think left to his devices, he would have said, no, I'm not going to sign it. I told him, I said, Dad, sign this thing because this is what Mother would have wanted you to do. And on that note, Wil, thanks again, bro. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. This trio is just has been astonishing and unforgettable in my life. Thank you so much.